Next, from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, we talk one-on-one with journalist David Yepsen, who now heads the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. Mr. Yepsen spent years as a leading political journalist in Iowa before being recruited to come to SIU. We hear his thoughts on Illinois politics and his approach to teaching politics and policy to students. This runs about 25 minutes. David Yepsen, director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute here at SIU in Carbondale. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
It's good to be with you.
Let's just start. You have been running the Institute now for over a year.
Right.
Tell us about your experiences. What are the challenges you've faced, and what have you been able to do in your brief tenure thus far?
Well, it's an exciting time to be in Illinois and to be around politics in this state. What we try to do here at this institute is to bring together academics, students, and practitioners to talk about problems facing the state and the country. Paul Simon founded this institute to do a lot of things he was interested in, and he was interested in a lot of different issues. And so we try to focus some attention on those questions. Ethical issues facing the state, particularly redistricting, was an issue that he was concerned about, that my predecessor, Mike Lawrence, was deeply involved in trying to fix the way this state draws its legislative district lines. We're not an advocacy group, so we do try to do research that reformers and people who are interested in better government in Illinois can use. We've done a lot of polling research. I also want to try to focus the Institute on some of the problems that face this state, particularly debt questions. I think for the next several years, the biggest public policy question facing this state is going to be the question of how you manage the finances in a time of no revenues and more demand for government services. It's a delicate thing, and we need to be talking about it. We need to be engaging citizens about it. So it's a lot of different things that the Institute's involved in. I've got a wide portfolio, and there just isn't enough time or money to do them all.
Recently, the Illinois Channel aired a program in which actually, to give credit to another institution here, the University of Illinois, the IGPA, put on a program in which 4 former governors talked about how academia can help state government. You've covered, as a journalist, state government for years. Now you're working in academia here at the Institute. What are your thoughts? How does an institution like the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute affect government where the rubber hits the road? Is it educating lawmakers? Is it the studies that you give them? How?
I think it's a couple things. First of all, I think a policy institute has to provide options to policymakers. I think you have to look at ideas that are out there and really study them about what they would work, what are the unintended consequences of doing them, to really try to provide a policymaker with options. It's not our business to be advocating for one side or another. It's our business, I think, to be providing them with alternatives. Here's the different ways you can do redistricting. Here's different ways you can do budgets. So I think the first thing is to provide policymakers with options. Secondly, I think it's maybe to give a little air cover, if you would, to some of these ideas. You know, new ideas typically are pretty controversial, and there's a lot of concern. And so I think we've got a job of taking some of the heat that a new idea might have, and to do a third of educating the public. I mean, this state faces, for example, in its finances, some really difficult trade-offs. And the people of Illinois, according to our polls, aren't real interested in doing any of them. Majority of people don't want to raise taxes, and yet majorities can't point to anything they want to cut. You know, that doesn't work. And so I think a policy institute in this state has to present that kind of information to the citizens and help facilitate the debate. So those are, I think, 3 important things that any policy institute ought to be doing in this state, trying to make a contribution. And as I say, the goal of, I think, any of us has to be to bring practitioners, politicians, to bring academics, and to bring students together to talk and work. It's amazing what sort of chemistry that can create. You can create some new ideas, some synergy of ideas, and I think it's important that we have that discussion in Illinois right now.
As you struggle, we've always had, actually institutions such as Southern Illinois here are funded in part by the state. I think a lot of people still think that you're funded entirely by the state. I believe SIU gets something like 40% or so of its budget. I'm not sure of the hard number. But as you as the head of an institute, you must go out and have to fundraise and talk to private sector people for money. How do you also maintain that line between making sure your research isn't tainted as you seek money from XYZ Corporation or something?
Well, you have to. We have an endowment fund that Paul started raising, and it's over the years has accumulated several $1,000,000 that each year throws off some income that we can use to finance polling, for example, and to use as to provide a little bit of that buffer that you're talking about between people with a vested interest and academics who are trying to do research. I think we have the buffer, and I think the fact that the Institute exists in part because it provides that sort of buffer. You don't have an insurance company giving healthcare researchers dollars directly. They come through a policy institute like ours, which gives a little bit of a buffer to the academic researcher. And I think everybody, the players in the game, want it to be that way. I think a lot of donors, they don't want to taint the research. They're interested in good government and good policy too. Certainly academics don't want to have their work tainted. So I hope that we can, and other policy institutes who are working in this state, can really provide that buffer, if you will.
Obviously, everyone's going out and trying to shake the money tree and get more in this period of time. I also think it's interesting if we look at the history of the Paul Simon Institute. Paul Simon was not a career, his career was not in higher ed, let me put it that way, nor was his successor Mike Lawrence, who, by the way, is on the Illinois Channel Board. Mike had a career as a journalist, and you have a career as a journalist. So you've had three people who are working in academia who did not come from higher education careers. To what extent is that a strength for you to have a view outside of the campus that you bring to the table?
Well, I think journalists are taught to try to look at all sides of a question before you write, to get some facts, to look at the options, to be fair. I mean, those are certainly things that I think Paul Simon tried to do in his career. I think they're things Mike Lawrence did. These are things I hope I do. So you try to bring a little bit of dispassionate observation to problems. The hard part, though, Terry, is as a reporter, you can have some pretty strong opinions about things that you just have to be very careful not to say, because you aren't a reporter anymore.
I resemble that comment.
You represent this institution and this institute, so sometimes you have to be careful not to dash off a quick column, if you would, say what you might really think.
Well, and I know Mike Lawrence wanted to write his column, and that was always kind of hard, I think, for him not to be able to get some of his opinions out. I will say, not to make it about me at all, but on the other hand, too, and I'm sure the interesting thing is, and it pertains to the Institute and getting information that is objective out there. By having to be objective, I've gone into interviews where I thought the person I'm interviewing is entirely wrong on an issue, and I found out that they told me things I had never heard. And it made me open to their ideas. So I think this getting good information out there is essential.
Yeah, well, and that's one thing that I think is true for journalists and people here at a university, and that is you have to have an open mind. You have to be curious, and always ask that one more question, and be open to a new fact. I had an editor one time who said that when you're working here, your job, you get paid to keep in mind some new fact, some new piece of information, new research that you can do. And so I think that's one similarity that I see with people here in the academy that I like. There is an intellectual curiosity, and I enjoy that part of it.
We should say you spent a long career covering Iowa politics.
That's right.
We touched on that in some previous interview, but just let's remind the viewers, how long were you in Iowa and some of your accomplishments?
I spent 34 years working for the Des Moines Register in Des Moines, Iowa. It's the largest paper in the state. And because of that, I got to cover the presidential caucus campaigns, which was fascinating perch for any reporter to have. I covered 9 presidential campaigns during my career, and parts of them. The first one was the '76 campaign, where I was the low man on the totem pole and sometimes told, go out and cover that guy Carter. He's not going anywhere. And so I learned an awful lot about politics. And that's where I met Senator Simon when he spent a lot of time in Iowa.
Back in '88?
In '87, '88 in that campaign.
You know, what was that like, just let me ask on that, because how unusual is that? You really got to meet probably everyone who became president, virtually.
Yeah, I mean,
not just met them, but you were probably around them for some length of time.
You have great access. I mean, I was under no illusions that people thought I was a great journalist, but they did understand that I worked for the largest paper in the state. And so I got to meet the best people in American politics, the best candidates, the best staff people, the best media people, and just an incredibly rewarding career. And it was a lot of fun. I'm just so grateful to the paper for having given me that experience. I mean, I'm a native Iowan. I didn't go to work there to cover caucuses. It was pure happenstance. But there are 2 states in the country where you have that kind of access, New Hampshire and Iowa. And so it was a great ride. I'm
being politically not correct because I'm going to take some higher academia to task here. You know, there are some institutions around the state, I won't mention, who do public policy research. And because, again, I think they've spent their whole life writing for others in higher ed, I can't even understand the titles of the studies, much less what they're talking about. You know, at what point is it critical, you know, that whatever research we're investing in as a society, and we're doing this, to get it out there to those who are going to enact it and have to weigh it, and as well as the citizens to say, should we or shouldn't we raise taxes or have more charter schools or whatever the case may be?
I think that is a good point, and I think it's a concern to a lot of faculty people. They're under a lot of pressure to publish or perish, to write, particularly if they're on a tenure track, and they're writing for their peers in academic journals, and yet at the same time they want their research and their work to have an impact. And so I think it's one of the things that a policy institute like ours can do is help, as I say, bring the academic, the practitioner, and the student together and to come up with some solutions, to just do symposiums where you give the academics a chance to voice their views and to question them and to try to put it in layman's terms. I think a lot of academics would like to do more of that, but they're under a lot of pressures among their peers to publish for what are called peer-reviewed journals. And sometimes that gets pretty arcane.
I've tried reading it. I just can't even slog through it, I must say. You know, one of the things in the journalism world I find fascinating is that we today have certain people like Anderson Cooper, who works for CNN, but is also on CBS's 60 Minutes. I don't know how they ever managed that. But to where I'm going with that is, to what extent do you, running the Paul Simon Institute, reach out, if at all, to the IGPA at the University of Illinois or your counterparts at Western Illinois or Northwestern?
Not as much as we should. And I've talked to some of these people about doing more, and of dwindling resources for everybody. I think that's a real issue on the table. Could we come together and work on a specific project or something? And so that's really something I'd like to see us do. We work on separate things. We're all a little different, but I do think that there are some things we could probably work together on. I'd like to see us try to do that for the good of the state.
When you came down to Southern Illinois here and accepted the job, you obviously brought, as we said, you spent so many years in Iowa, you had an outsider's viewpoint. What strikes you about Illinois? What stands out, both in terms of the state politics as well as the region, or however you want to answer that?
Well, I mean, I'm in southern Illinois. This is a rural part of the state. I love that. I come from Iowa, so I feel right at home. And people are just friendly and wonderful. I love SIU. This is an institution with a historic mission of providing students with that first generation student with that first step on the ladder. And I see that as a real core mission here, that I love that, helping young journalists trying to get trained. One of the biggest surprises that I've had about Illinois is the geographic division in this state, this upstate, downstate business. I find it very corrosive and very counterproductive. It divides over a lot of lines, urban and rural. Some of it's racial, some of it's cultural. This is a big state. I didn't realize how big it was until I tried to drive to Wisconsin and Rockford one day, and I'm drive for 5 hours and I'm still in Illinois. I'm not used to that. But I think that the size of the state makes it difficult for leaders to govern. How do you develop a consensus around issues with such a diverse population? I mean, we are south of the Mason-Dixon line here. Paul Simon used to always say that he comes from a town south of Richmond. And yet you got one of the largest cities in the country. And so it becomes difficult to govern. And I think one of the things that in policy business, I'd like to see journalists try to do it, is to try to find ways to get people in Illinois simply to understand each other. And so I think that's been the big surprise. I mean, I knew the upstate, downstate thing was there, but I'm surprised at the extent where that cleavage exists.
Let me ask you just a bit. There might be someone who is in high school, or they're wanting to go into politics. They love the study of it and might want to come here. How does the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute interact with students, or are you an entity unto yourself within the campus?
We interact with students a lot, and one of the things Paul felt strongly about was the Civic Education mission. We try to do things to empower students who want to go into public service. I ask the question at every event we do of our guests: if there's a future governor in this audience, what should he or she be doing now to prepare themselves for a career in public service? We help them try to do internships, help them try to get experiences working in campaigns, and developing their own leadership skills, doing those kind of workshops, empowering them to have successful careers in public service, but particularly in the political arena.
And from the journalism standpoint, are they encouraged to write? How should we be communicating? I mean, you're really a communicator. We say
right.
You're a print journalist, you're a communicator. How should we be communicating these ideas and concepts? And to what extent is technology, that's changed every other thing in our society, changing or going to change, from your perspective, how we get these ideas out?
Well, one of the things I do, I teach a course in political journalism through the journalism school here. And while the medium is changing, Twitter and social media and Facebook, the need to be able to write clearly and to communicate clearly is universal. I don't care what platform you're working on, you've got to have a basic communication skill. And so one of the things that I insist on with my students is simply that ability. That's the most important thing journalism schools anywhere can be doing, is giving their students simply that tool to use. Now, and students today are going to have a much different work environment than I did when I started in the business in 1974. There you went in, you worked for a paper your whole career, and you retired. Students today are putting together packages of they're doing video news, they're blogging, they're writing for Facebook, they're posting audio clips. It's just amazing the amount of platforms and the amount of stuff that a young journalist has to know in order to get and keep a job. Well, it's our business here to train them with that and to try to equip them with those skills and help them to get that first job.
So now you're here, you've been here for, what, about a year and a half, I guess right. You're approaching. Tell us about your strategic view. When you look into, what is it that you would like to see, where would you like to see the Paul Simon Institute?
I want to see us do more on the research functions of a policy institute. Paul always said jokingly that this was a do tank and not a think tank. Well, I want to do things thoughtfully. And so I think it's important for us to provide policymakers with good research, with options for solving problems. So I would hope to bring, during my tenure here, the biggest thing I hope to do, Terry, is to take these wonderful resources that exist on this campus, the brain power that's here, and harness it a little bit and try to work on some of the problems facing this state. And there are plenty of problems out there, but to help give policymakers some options. Here's what you can do about pensions. Here's what you can do about a tax system. Here's what you can do about cutting budgets. I had a student, an MPA student, say, you know, I really need to have some courses in how we cut government. That the whole discipline tends to focus more on managing and expanding government. And she said, during my career as a public manager, I'm going to be spending a lot more time cutting budgets. Well, we ought to find ways to provide that student with those tools. I thought it was a very insightful question that she had. So I think to provide some intellectual energy and firepower for policymakers in this state, and to articulate it well, just as you mentioned, take away some of the arcane academic stuff and really make this usable information. If I can accomplish that on issues of public policy, particularly on reform and ethics question, then I think I'll have a successful tenure here.
As we close out, let me give you a chance to do a commercial. You're out there, like we all are, like I am, shaking the money, the tin cup. But these things are worth investing in. The Illinois Channel is worth investing in, and so is the Institute. Why should someone who has some dollars to spare invest to support an institute like the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute?
I think they should invest in us because we help students. We do a lot to try to help students develop their careers in public policy, because we're trying to develop secondarily issues and to provide those options that the policymakers really need to try to stay in the trenches and carry on Paul Simon's great traditions and values when it comes to ethics and reform. Ethics issues are just huge in this state, more so than almost any other state with the exception of New Jersey. And I think it's not a laughing matter anymore in this state. It's something that's got to be dealt with. And so I think people who want to support the Institute are going to be supporting academic efforts at reform.
You know, the advantage of being the executive director of the Illinois Channel is you can keep rolling the tape when you want to. Because there's something else, as you said, you know, something I'm concerned about is, and why one mission I think of the Illinois Channel, and I want to get your ideas on, is to make sure that American students, and from one generation to the next, that they understand the principles of democracy and their role as citizens. Expand upon that. To what extent is your teaching of these kids? Also, as you were saying, that was a big part of Paul Simon's civic education. How do we accomplish that? And when you are dealing with these young students, what are you finding? Are they pretty good on their civic education, or are they lacking?
Well, I think we all have a path in life, and at some point we get more engaged in politics and public affairs. That's why people tend to vote more frequently when they're older. I think young Americans today get it. They understand that this is a tough world there. They're shouldering a great amount of personal debt to be here. They know that they understand the national debt and the problems that's going to present. They're worried about a job. These young Americans are focused, and they're here to get some tools to do a better job. So I don't see a problem that I have with the students that I deal with in understanding politics and journalism. I mean, they're hungry for it. Now, that's not speaking for every student, but certainly the one of the things that I'm encouraged about is that the idealism and the altruism that are here. You know, you get cynical in our business as a reporter. Young Americans aren't cynical, and that's really refreshing. It's been a great change of pace for me to come and deal with people who still have a great deal of hope for this country. And I think Paul would look down on this institute and what we're doing and saying that's it's good to restore a little of that altruism. I remember Paul one time lecturing. I was at a press conference and we were peppering him with questions, and he had a great line, and he said, when I was a young reporter, the greatest occupational hazard was whiskey. With you guys, it's cynicism. You know, and I think, Terry, I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And so I'm glad to be in an atmosphere now where I'm dealing with people who are altruistic about the future.
Well, David Yepsen, that's probably a good spot to stop. So thank you again for taking the time to speak with us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you, Terry.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.